Hello and welcome to India Career Center, the one-stop podcast for students, professionals, parents, and guardians. In every episode, we will try to deal with a current topic that needs expert advice related to career guidance, and career mentoring. Please welcome your host, Dr. S.P. Mishra, to the show. And happy listening.
Hello and welcome to another episode on India Career Center podcast. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Steve Joordens once again to our show. This is the third time I'm hosting Professor Joordens on the show. In this particular episode, we will talk about learning, a subject which is very close to Professor Joordens. So I'll briefly give a background to what we are going to talk. So learning has always been about more than just memorizing facts. It's about thinking clearly, asking better questions, and learning how to communicate ideas with confidence with others. Yet, for students, classrooms and online platforms still don't reflect how humans actually learn. So in this episode, we'll try to understand more about this aspect of learning. In the previous episodes, Professor Steve Joordens has always been very consistent in challenging the status quo with his ideas, blending his the cognitive science side of it and using some practical innovation. I think he continues to do that, and the subject we will be focusing more during this conversation is his latest project, it's called the TalkLab. He briefly mentioned about it in our previous conversation in November 2024, and that actually stuck with me, and I thought we should actually explore more about what he has been doing in this intervening period and learn more about it. It's always a pleasure to talk to Professor Steve Joordens with his innovative ideas. Without further ado, so Professor Joordens, thank you so much for being with us today. I know we got a very short window before you get into another meeting, but we'll try to capture as much during this conversation. Thank you for your time.
Fantastic, SB. I always enjoy our chats, and thank you for having me on your show 3 times. I appreciate it very much, and I look forward to this conversation because we're going to be talking a lot about conversations in this conversation. So it'll be.
That's right. So we'll move on quickly to the first one. So you have spent years researching learning and teaching. So what is the biggest mismatch you see today between how students are taught and how human beings actually learn?
Yeah, I mean, even before generative AI became what it is now, and I think that's changed things even more, I've always felt traditional education focuses a lot on knowledge transmission, and that was a very important role early in education. But now, of course, knowledge is so freely available to all. And in the modern world, I think it's much more the skills, the ability to think critically, the ability to think creatively. And again, we'll be talking a lot, the ability to communicate with one another, because that's one where not only is it critically important to everything we do, it's on the decline. We're seeing in our youth a real challenge they have having really focused, direct interactions. And that's been more and more obvious to me since the pandemic. I see a lot of what we call social anxiety. Literally, a lot of our youth are alone, lonely. They want friends, but they're literally afraid to have a conversation with the person sitting next to them. They feel it will not go well, that person will not like them, and it's better not to even try. And so I see this as a real crisis that a lot of our youth are facing as they come to the career force. They need those conversational skills. And in fact, already in a lot of commercial, like a lot of commercial entities, they will also tell you that the senior employees have to do all the conversing with clients because the junior employees are not comfortable doing so. And this is not a sustainable situation. And so it's one I've been focusing on quite a bit, both in education and in corporate settings.
So you mentioned rightly that this particular trend of lack of ability to communicate has probably increased post the pandemic. But what could be the reason? I mean, have you thought about as to why this has actually come to a stage like this?
Yes, I've thought about it a lot, and I think I've found my favorite villain. My villain would be asynchronous communication. That from about, as soon as we give our children a phone, from that period on, their dominant form of interacting, of communicating with their friends, is through text messaging or various other asynchronous ways of communicating. So they kind of do not get the face-to-face time that you and I may have had when we were younger, and they develop these really bad habits. They will describe themselves as ruminating over what they're saying. So they think so hard about the message, how to craft it, etc. And then they send it. And then when a message comes back, they now think, what does that guy mean? Are they implying this? Are they implying that? So it's a really slow process. And when they're used to that, and then we bring them in a face-to-face situation, first of all, it's all too fast for what they're comfortable with. And secondly, they have trouble reading the nonverbals. Right now, as I speak to you, you're nodding your head. You're giving me feedback that says, yep, I agree with what you're saying. But they have trouble reading that feedback. And they often read it negatively. They think it reflects a negative evaluation of them. And so the feedback actually kind of scares them because they're just not used to processing it. And those are tough challenges because they're often 5 or 6 years of bad habits that have developed, and now we're going to try to do something about it. But it's a real challenge for a lot of our youth. Not all of them, but a lot of them.
So, Professor, is it because when people, especially youngsters who are engaged in their own world using the mobile devices, they often are actually biased by what they get in their mobile devices, and hence their knowledge or the vision for the world is actually a little narrow, and hence it becomes difficult for them to communicate in a world which is more spontaneous, which is a lot of unknown when you're dealing with things which are spontaneous.
Yeah.
Is it that?
Yeah, I think that is part of it. I think you're hitting some other things. Like, we know that the social anxiety is driven by something we call fear of negative evaluation. They think they are going to be looked at poorly. And when you look at social media, it's just full of, divisive talk and angry people. And so as you go out as a young person in the world, if you think this is what communication is like, and then exactly, as you say, it's spontaneous, you're going to say something. Are you going to say something wrong that's going to offend that other person? And are they going to now get angry at you? And so I think the world of social media makes the world look black and white and scary and angry, because a lot of social media stuff is like that. And so now, I think they carry those worries into the world, and they don't realize that most of us are actually nice people. And most of us, if we take the time to speak to one another, it's usually a very positive event, but they don't think it will be. And there's actually research to show that, by the way, that most of the time, if you talk to a stranger, it will go really well for both of you. But if you ask somebody ahead of time, will it go well? They'll usually say, no, it will not. And so we don't have a good understanding of how important those social connections are for all of us.
Fantastic. So you have been a teacher yourself for, I don't know, for 3 decades now, I think.
Yes.
And yes. And so you have actually seen the technology of evolution of teaching, so to speak.
Yes.
So from your earlier days to now, what exactly you see and what actually frustrates you actually in terms of both in traditional classroom as well as online learning model? By the way, I must tell viewers that I got to know about you through your MOOCs sessions,
Yes.
introduction psychology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's actually talk about that a little bit. I've always been fascinated when somebody says something is going to disrupt higher education. I like that, to be honest, because I am someone who wants to bring change. There's a lot of things I don't think we're doing well, and I'll give you a few examples in just a moment. But when some force comes, and first it was the MOOCs. MOOCs were going to come and they were going to destroy universities, traditional universities. And so I had to be part of it. I had to see, what is this disruption? And so I started teaching a number of MOOCs, and I have a number on Coursera now. And I realized, okay, this is really neat. It's really interesting. It's not going to destroy universities. But more recently, generative AI is really disrupting. It's really taking a lot of our traditional ways, especially around assessment. Suddenly we don't have valid assessments anymore because students can score high grades without learning. And that's a real problem for education institutions. I think we need to do teamwork much better than we have, because I think teamwork is the best thing we can do to prepare our students for their lives after university. And I think we have to do a much better job supporting students, especially in Canada. So, for example, I teach 1,800 students in a class. I can teach them, I can lecture to them, I can do all that well. But if they need me at any moment in time, it's very hard to be there for 1,800. And so these have always been problems. And now AI is causing a lot of challenges to what we do, but suddenly I'm seeing opportunities to these problems, and I'm seeing a willingness in the education system to think about innovation, to think about new ways. And I actually argue right now we are in a Thomas Kuhn-like paradigm shift where the old ways are not working. We're starting to discover new ways. And I actually think when we get through this, which will be 2 or 3 years of figuring out how to work with AI effectively, I think we're going to have a much better education system and much better prepared students. And so I'm actually really invigorated by this time, even though it's a time of great challenge and frustration for educators. I think there's an opportunity now to really fix some things we've never gotten.
Fantastic. So you mentioned during our conversation in 2024, late 2024, briefly about this your platform. Obviously, by that time, you and your team had started working on it already. So, what was that moment when you actually thought that something like this needs to be developed, and how it actually turned to you?
Yeah, and so just as we've been talking about, I've been noticing I actually measure the social anxiety of my students, and I found that over half of them are beyond the clinical level. And so this is really becoming a serious problem. And I started thinking, how can we help them? We need to develop these conversational skills. And this is what TalkLab is going to be all focused on. It's like we have to teach them how to have synchronous conversations, which is, you can say, oh, that's a shame. Okay, it is. So we started thinking about how can we do that well? And of course, there's lots of good tips and strategies. There's lots of information we can give them, but what they need is practice. And so the question was, once you give them some information, how can they now practice that when they're scared to talk to one another? And that's what kind of pushed us towards generative AI. And specifically, we started trying to create agents that were as human as possible in terms of a conversational dynamic. And so I'll talk about 3 things that our agents do, and it's within what we call our parallels system of TalkLab. They have 3 unique characteristics. First of all, they can take on emotional states. So we can let me actually back up. First of all, we get rid of that helpful assistant, that part of the AI that always wants to make you happy all the time. We strip that away. We then add an emotional system. So our agents can take on some emotional state. They can be happy, sad, angry, whatever we wish. As you speak to them, that emotional state changes. And so that means the conversation has a bit of a flow, like it should. It's not like a static person. It's like the person is changing state a little bit. So that's one thing, the emotion. The other thing is what we call cognitive agency. We give all of our agents goals. They are talking to you for a reason. There's a purpose, and they're trying to achieve something from the conversation. That's how we speak to one another, right? You and I are trying to achieve something in our conversation here. And so it, again, makes it feel much more human. And then the third thing is, of course, analytics. As you're speaking with these agents, you can get real world immediate feedback on how the conversation is going. So that can guide the learner, but it can also be used to feed a learning system. If this were, say, in a corporate setting and you were doing conversational training, you can see, is it working? And in fact, a lot of corporations, we know there's billions of dollars being spent on conversational training right now. Most have no idea if what they're doing is even working because they have no way of measuring success. So we now have that built in as well. We're using that to help our students, but increasingly we've got inbound interest from all sorts from healthcare institutions, but also like KPMG. And we're talking to KPMG because they, like a lot of corporations, are telling me what I just told you. Their junior employees are not comfortable talking to the clients. They're worried they're going to mess up the relationship. They want the senior employees to do all of the high stakes conversations. And that's not sustainable because those senior employees are going to retire. And so somehow we need to, get people comfortable talking to other human beings again. And that's really what we're focusing on with TalkLab.
Fantastic. I think all of us experience the chatbots on various platforms, and after few rounds of conversation, you feel that you have reached the dead end. So I'm sure while designing this TalkLab, you and your team have really thought through as to not to go in that path and really create something interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the advantages we bring. So first of all, we have the psychological expertise to kind of think about, what makes a good conversation. But secondly, we have the data, a lot of proprietary data. We've been doing this for a while. And to give one example, we have a virtual zookeeper at our local zoo. He stands outside the otters. He looks like a video game. You go up and you can ask him all about the otters or about the zoo. But the goal of the zoo was to optimize the amount of information transferred. They want people to learn while they're at the zoo. And so first he was just answering questions, but then people would run out of questions. They would ask a question or two and they didn't know what to ask. And so we learned through the data and by playing with the way things were working, how to turn him into a real conversationalist. So he will answer a question, but then he'll often ask a question after that, or he'll tell a joke, or he'll give you a trivia kind of thing about the otters. And so he knows that every now and then he can't just wait for questions to come. If he, in fact, carries the interaction, then we can create a two-way conversation. And that's what we've been able to do. And so the amount of information being transmitted gets way, way higher as we have this good, rich conversation. And it just feels more satisfying to the human. Because like you say, these other chatbots, they run out of being satisfying pretty odd. They repeat what you said a lot. They're just trying to make you happy. Ours are totally different. And I'll mention one other example just to give you a sense. One of the things we've also created is a de-escalation training agent. And so when you meet him, he is angry. He is swearing at you. He is in the middle of a fight with his wife. You've come in as a police officer and you have to try to talk him down. You have to try to relax him. And so our agents are capable of doing that. The kinds of things where businesses would use actors, maybe. We no longer need actors. We can create a whole host of characters that you can interact with. One other example to give you a sense, imagine a sales team that's learning a sales book, and now you want them to practice. Do you want them to practice with real clients right away? Or would you love to have a host of artificial clients, some of whom are really easy to talk to, some of whom are really challenging to talk to, and maybe they can train and work on their craft there before they get released to real clients. So we're seeing so many use cases. And it really, I'm supposed to be retiring, to be honest. I'm supposed to be thinking about retirement, but this all has me so energized. And as you know, we've built the company underneath it now. We're getting all kinds of interest, and it's a lot of fun to see what we can do in general, but also within education. So I'd like to come back to education at some point and say, how are we using these to really kind of highlight the real power of them?
Fantastic. So when we started the conversation, you were addressing the challenge of why youngsters are not communicating, and that's how you thought of a solution like this. And possibly that's the underlining principle as to why you decided to go for voice mode rather than the chat mode.
Yeah, 100%. So our agents right now, I mean, we could make them chattable if we want to, but right now they're not. They're all conversational, and that is, as you say, intentional, because we want our students to get practice. And so let me give you one example. Let's talk about the student support. Me and my 1,800 students. One Monday morning, I woke up and my postdoc said, I've created a virtual version of you, virtual Steve. And I'm like, what? A virtual me? And he's like, yeah, you can, it's like office hours. It'll be there all the time. Students can ask it questions. It'll answer like you would answer. But also what we found out is they could do other things. They could ask it to ask them questions. They could say, I just did a chapter on human memory. Give me some questions. What should I know now? What should I be able to answer? Or give me multiple choice questions that have this following style. And it would do that. I couldn't do that on the fly. If they just asked me to do things, it would be hard for me. They also love doing this at 2 a.m. when I would not do it. The agent can speak to 20 of them at the same time. And before an exam, the day before an exam, we see like hundreds of conversations with these agents as students are getting prepared and ready. And so what these agents can do that's really amazing. I always say this, and I think it takes people a moment to really understand the power of this. They can do high touch at scale. And so it's like there's now 1,800 of me available. And so students can have one-on-one conversations. And we haven't taken any jobs away. We still have the TAs, we still have me, but this is a third, and that's why we call it a parallel form of support. So the idea, we keep it conversational. And so what we're kind of telling our students is, hey, if you want access to this, if you want to be able to use this tool, you have to talk to it. That's the only way we're going to allow you to gain this valuable resource is by conversing. And so we know they're comfortable talking about AI, talking to AI. We have a lot of research on that. It doesn't judge them. It doesn't make them feel that fear of negative evaluation. And so we kind of see that as the first start to get them a little comfortable with the AI. Then actually, let me just jump to the next one to make it make sense. The goal, though, is to have them talk to humans, not to get comfortable talking to AIs. And so the next step we take is with teamwork. And so often in education, we don't do teamwork enough. And we don't do it for the following reason. Some members of the team are not very good team members, and they make the rest of the team upset. And that upset team comes to the professor and says, hey, so-and-so is not doing their job. And the professor goes to so-and-so and they say, no, I'm doing whatever. They don't understand. And the professor doesn't know what to do. So what we're now doing is we have a team, but we have an AI within each team. That AI has two roles. First, it's the eyes and the ears of the professor. It sees everything that the team does. And so no more telling the professor this or that. The professor knows exactly what happened. But the second thing is we make that AI an expert on teamwork. We imbibe all of the information that we know about how to function well in teams, and it becomes a resource for the team. If they're running into challenges, they can ask the AI, what should we do if this person's not responding? And the AI will provide them with advice. And so it's like a little project manager within every team. I have 380 teams in my class. So again, it's like suddenly I have 380 additional assistants to support my students as they learn to talk to one another. Because that's what they do in teamwork. They have to talk to one another, human to human. And so that brings us that next step of trying to, again, complete the circle, build those skills a little bit more.
It still sounds very, very sci-fi to me. I'm sure it will be fantastic.
It feels sci-fi every day. It feels like we are living in some of these books that I read when I was a kid from the 1950s and the 1960s. It feels like that sci-fi is coming true today.
So when a student is actually, interacting with this, one of the agents or one of the clones of your agents, let's say it is confused or completely wrong. So how this agent actually responds to that student?
So one of the first things we realize about AI is even when you strip away that helpful assistant, they still tend to be very friendly, very understanding, very empathetic. AIs don't usually get upset with us. We can make our AIs get upset with people, actually, but generally not. And so students find them very comfortable. They, by the way, let me mention this, sorry. So far, all of the interactions are anonymous. So the student can go to this and their identity is not tagged. And so they don't have to worry about asking a stupid question or whatever. They can say whatever they want. And the AIs are usually, when they're programmed well, and they're very easy, we have an app called Parallels where you can create these AIs literally in minutes. And you can have all of these qualities to them. But the AIs are often more friendly than humans. They're sometimes more helpful, more directly helpful. As one example, let's say you are working in a team and you're running into some challenges. Your professor probably is not an expert on teams. They probably haven't read the books on what makes a good team work well or what doesn't, but other people have written those books. We can make our agent sort of not have the knowledge of the people who wrote the books. And so they can give much higher quality knowledge than even the professor can. And that's where it's kind of nice. Again, it's like this parallel layer of support that we can build in. And I think these are the things that corporations are looking for as well, that I'm finding is they want conversational training. They would like students to be able to get the feedback on the direct analytics. They would like to know their training programs actually work. And they would like to be able to optimize them so that they work at their best. And that's the kind of thing we're trying to do in the university and bring to the other businesses and such at the same time.
So you mentioned two things. One is that your system is actually built in such a way that the conversation can be anonymous.
Yes.
So anybody can safely interact.
Yes.
And the second thing, what you said is it is not designed to be always helpful. So apart from that, what else it is not designed to be?
Not designed. So I mean, you can certainly set up guardrails, and there would be all the usual guardrails you'd have in education, right? So it's not going to be swearing, it's not going to be, et cetera, all of those kinds of things. But really, like, for example, one of the things that I find kind of funny in some of the commercial conversational things is you ask it a question and it begins by telling you what you just asked it. And you're like, Yeah, I know what you just asked. Just answer me, right? And so one of the things, our agent is more like it's a human. You ask it a question, it will give you an answer. It'll be proper two-way interaction. You can interrupt it and it will stop and then carry on. So it just feels very natural, very comfortable, very human. And that's really what we're going for. We have got that emotion system is patent on that. That gives it a lot of that richness, but we're increasingly trying to find additional ways. And I'll give you one example of how far we're going with this now. We're in discussions with Toronto Police Services about ways we can help with their training of officers. And one of the issues that came up was interrogations. Could we create criminals that officers could interrogate, and could they be realistic enough so that at first they were hiding information, but if you ask them questions the right way, then they might reveal some information. You might be able to start to piece together what's going on. In order for an agent to sort of model that, to simulate that, you have to make it very human. It has to have motives. It has to have worries. It has to think about other individuals and how what it does will impact those other individuals. So you have to kind of build all that. That's what we're about. We're about creating these ultra human agents that can produce really good simulations so people can learn how to interact with humans before they actually interact with humans, not before, but at least to help them interact with humans, because again, so many find that so stressful.
So, Professor, you mentioned that the interaction of the students are anonymous. So I'm just thinking loud. I mean, for example, let's say somebody, ex-student, started interacting with the agent, let's say 1 year ago. And through the 1 year of conversation, the student has actually built up some amount of capability in terms of learning a particular subject, or even the capability to interact better in terms of the communication and so on and so forth. Will it be a good idea actually to be able to see this transition of the student? Oh, I mean, the identities could be still kept anonymous, but is there a way that the student, he or she, will be able to recognize the progress through the year?
Yeah, so that's very interesting. So we're actually, this question of anonymous or not is a really interesting question. And actually, to be honest, we're thinking of making it just a little toggle so that a person can choose to go anonymous, just kind of like on a browser when you go to incognito or something. You can say, I'd rather have an anonymous conversation now, because just as you say, there are a number of advantages to it not being anonymous. One is, just as you say, we can track learning. Maybe the even more important thing is, one of the things we've been trying to do in education for many years is to truly personalize learning, to make it like, if I'm talking to SP and I'm helping him learn, what is it the things he likes to think about? If I'm giving him examples, can I give him examples of something from psychology, but bring it to his world? Something where you go, oh yeah, I get that. When we de-anonymize, when we actually say, hey, it's Steve you're talking to, that agent has the ability to tailor how it interacts with us in ways that it knows will be engaging to us. And it's just so real personalized learning. And this could become even more important, by the way, when we do the next thing, which we haven't talked about yet, but is the real goal on my mind, which is assessment. I do not like multiple choice assessments.
Yes.
I sort of say this thing now, and it takes people a while to kind of unpack this thing. But before I retire, I would like to be the one that carves the end date on the tombstone of multiple choice testing. I'd like to say 2026, no more multiple choice testing. I think we can do better now. I think we can have oral assessments of learning like we used to do, but now we can do it at scale with the AIs. The AIs can interrogate the students, find out how much they know, how much breadth, how much depth, but also skills. So I think we can do assessment more holistically. And just like we were talking about, we can also personalize the assessment. We can say, we want to assess SP in a way that's going to allow him to show us himself at his best. And if that means being tested in Indian language, or in an Indian language, maybe you would show better your knowledge that way. Well, that's what we want to know. How much do you know? We don't want to know how much can you tell me in English. We want to know how much have you learned. And so maybe the way we ask questions, the style of the interaction, maybe even could be fit to a person's cultural norms to make them feel really comfortable in that assessment. And that might allow them to show themselves at their best. So I think we can get assessment right And I think assessment drives everything else. If we can do a good holistic assessment that includes skills as well as knowledge, well, now teachers are going to spend more time teaching skills because they know that will be part of the assessment, right? Teaching to the test is good when the test is good. And I think we can get the test good with AI in ways never possible before. Again, high touch at scale, oral assessments at scale, we can now do.
Yeah, I think I understand the context because in a country of India, where you have millions of young students get into the higher education or even to the school, unfortunately, the method of assessment is a process of filtering out people. It's not exactly the process of understanding what is the level of learning. So, I mean, I do understand the context, and possibly this is something which will take some time for its implementation everywhere. But I think your point is right. I mean, multiple choice questions hardly are the best way to really assess somebody
Right.
in terms of the knowledge
Yeah.
itself.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing I like to point out when people say why, there's lots of geeky reasons I can tell you why it doesn't assess learning very well. But is one thing to just think about. Every multiple choice test has one correct answer and 3 pieces of misinformation. And sometimes students pick the wrong answer. And we know from research when they pick the wrong answer, they believe it's right. They leave our tests having learned wrong things, and then we push them out the door. And so for me, that's always bothered me as an educator. I want to know what they learn. I don't want to actually interfere with their learning as the last thing I do in a course.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. So moving on now, let's look at the fear factor, because unlike you who has adopted learning new technology and you have adapted all along throughout your journey, but most of the traditional teachers do not understand about AI so well, and hence there's always a linkage that AI is a system to teach.
Yes.
So how do you address that?
Yeah. And it is. I mean, so there's always, like, when you're in a situation like this, where in this case, an external force, generative AI, has changed the rules of the game. And so now you can do one of two things. You can cry over the things that we've lost. And we've lost things, and they're worth crying over. You know, for example, asking students to write something from scratch. That's going to be rare now. They're just not going to do that. They're going to produce drafts using AI or whatnot. And we can say, oh, that's terrible. Also, the way we assess online, there's ways we just can't do it anymore. So a lot of people are focused on that. But at the same time as it's disrupting old ways, it's providing new potential. And so, yes, I know that I'm the guy that's looking. So one of the things I say, by the way, is the bridge between fear and opportunity is wonder. When you start playing with AI, when it stops being something that's scary, and it's usually scary because it's unknown, by the way. We're scared of things we don't understand very well. As you start to play with it, and I mean play, you can have fun with AI. You can do the stuff that'll create images. You can take a picture of the things in your fridge and ask it what you could cook for dinner. You can give it these silly you can write songs with AI if you want. So sometimes in some of the schools here, that's what I recommend, to have what I call wonder days, where the teachers get to play and they get to see some of the cool stuff you can do. And that sort of changes your mind. When you start to go, whoa, that's kind of interesting, then you can start to say, wait a minute, could it do this or could it do that? And especially when you bring that into your environment, whether that's a work environment or an education environment, hey, could I suddenly, be able to be there for all 1,800 students at 2 a.m? Could I actually be available to them in a way? I can. And so that's, I've been always a little bit that way, looking more to the future and less to the past, for sure. But how do you do that at scale? So when you have an education system and you have a lot of teachers and maybe 10% are like me, they're like, this is exciting. Maybe we can do new things. And maybe 9 out of 10 are like, oh my goodness, this is the last thing we need. We've had a pandemic. I just want to teach the way I always taught. How do you get those 90%? So I think you'll like this idea, speaking, knowing your mindset a little bit. I've been pushing a lot the idea of what we call intrapreneurship. So we all know entrepreneurship, and an entrepreneur is a completely separate, small startup that's trying to do something. Intrapreneurship says, maybe we have to think about having startups or sort of like that within our bigger organization. So whatever our bigger organization is, and it could be the University of Toronto, maybe for 90% of the people, we say, you just do what you're doing for now. Those 10%, they're going to be the ones that we empower to play, to try different things, to come up with ways of using AI that reach certain goals well, so-called use cases. And when they find these use cases, if they can package them up nicely, then we can ultimately create a menu and we can go back to the 90% and we can say, listen, you don't have to worry about this big, scary AI and you don't have to worry about understanding it. Here's a specific way of using it that achieves a certain goal. If you want that goal, then here are specific instructions you can give to your students to kind of make that all happen. And now it's a little less scary. Now it becomes something that the teacher feels comfortable with. Teachers want to be the expert in the room. And so the last thing we like is when our students know something better than we do, right? And so at least in this way, we can start to feel like, okay, that use of AI, I understand and I can bring in. And so that's one of, but it's still a hard process. It's still, our teachers have been through so much. We rely on them for so much. Many of them are exhausted. They've been in chronic stress for a long time. The last thing they need to be told is change everything you do. It's a big ask. And so we have to understand that too. And yet we have to innovate because the old ways aren't working. And so it's a challenging time. I think it's exciting at some levels. I think it's exhausting at other levels. That's the time in which we live.
Yeah, so I can imagine, because if you are a teacher standing in front of your hundreds of students, and you know that all the information what you have in your head is also available on a big scale on the AI platform, and the ability of the AI to actually formulate ideas and communicate, though right now mostly on the written format, but that's a very scary thought actually for any teacher, to be standing in front of these hundreds of students and knowing that they know about the subject also, if somebody is smart enough. So it's a difficult transition, and I think we have to give it to our teachers, how to transition to this.
Yeah. We have to understand the challenge they're facing, because it was a difficult job before this and it's become more difficult. And you're right. It is, we used to kind of think of teachers as the one that's have the knowledge, passing that on to the next generation. And more teachers are different. It's kind of like the knowledge is all around you, but how can you actually work, for example, work with AI might be an example. How can you work with AI to develop what you know and what you understand and how deeply you do? And how can you just survive? Like, that's why I come to critical thinking, creative thinking, communication skills. So it's less about knowledge and more about, well, let me say it this way. One of the reactions in education to AI that I think has been good has been to focus less on the product and more on the process. So when we ask a student, we give them an assignment, we used to just say, okay, and then hand in this thing at the end, and I'm going to grade that thing at the end. Now we're saying more, tell me about your process. So you're going to produce something at the end, but I want to know how you did it. How did you start? What specific resources did you use? How did you use AI? Did you bring it together with your own work, etc.? That's what we're going to grade, because that's where the learning is happening or not. If your process is, I took your question, I fed it to ChatGPT and I got this answer, you're not going to get a very good grade. So we say to students, you can't do that. You have to show us the evidence of your learning. And I think, that change is a really good change of mindset for us to have. But it's a change. When you've been teaching for 30 years or 20 years in a certain way, and you only have 5 or 10 years to go before you're done, you're not all that motivated to find a brand new way to do what you do. But if you're really devoted to the children, to the youth, that it feels like that's what we have to do, because knowledge is not what's going to bring them success in the future. It's the ability to work with the knowledge, to come up with sort of novel ideas, novel perspectives, and to understand what they're doing. And that's what we have to teach them how to do now, I think. In some education schools here, I know what their goal is that every class students are working with AI to learn how to work with AI, because we know one thing about the future: AI is going to be there and they are going to need to know how to interact and live with it to function well. Those are the people that I've heard it said before. You're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to somebody who knows how to use AI. That's the skill that these students need in the future.
So how do you see this platform parallels to get implemented in countries like India or other countries? So what's the journey? I mean, how have you thoughts, some ideas about how to scale it up to other parts of?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, we're early on the journey, and the really interesting thing about where we've come so far, you hear of word of mouth. Literally, we've done this is almost the most proactive thing I've done, SP, as far as talking to the world about this. Mostly, we've been talking locally, and I mentioned things like the Toronto Zoo, the Toronto Police Services, something called the University Health Network, St. Mike's Call. All of these local places have come to us because they've heard, and they have sometimes recommended us to each other. And so right now, we're kind of building the business and scaling to our local demand has become a challenge. And now you throw India, and I'm like, whoa, I'm still in Toronto trying to make Toronto work here. But that is absolutely the goal. And I think sometimes it would involve working with other companies. Like, what I can imagine is there's probably already companies doing professional development in India, potentially at scale, potentially working with a lot of corporations. And maybe one of those companies would be interested in working with us so that we could bring their product, kind of make their products better by infusing a lot of what we do. But then that doesn't mean we have to set up the whole shop in India. It would be a lot easier to be working with partners in different places and able to have the scale of impact we would like to have. And this is a problem everybody runs into. These high stakes conversations. I'll give you one example. This is pitch deck example, I'm afraid, but in customer service, we know that $3.7 trillion a year is lost because of bad communications, things that go wrong. There's real impact on businesses when we can't have those rich conversations that build trust. And that's what we're all about, is trying to bring that back, the trusting relationships that feed innovation, that feed success. And we know that's wanted everywhere. And so the question is exactly what you asked. How can we do that at scale? And I think, as always, everything that's done at scale is done with others, as teams that are working well together. And so I think that would be our approach as we go beyond Canada.
Fantastic. What worries the most about the current direction of AI in education, and what are your thoughts in terms of what is the optimism, so that we can close on an optimistic note?
Yeah.
But first, let's understand about the worries in education.
Well, I mean, the big worry right now, you mentioned the word cheating earlier, and I know in a lot of meetings I've had, a lot of educators are using that word. But when you think about that word from the other side, we as education institutions have two jobs. One, we have to teach, but the other one is we have to assess with validity. You have to trust that if I say this person's an A and that person's a B, there's an actual real difference there. We've lost assessment validity because of cheating. But right now, a lot of educational institutions, we know that students who don't really know the material well are getting good grades. That is a major, major problem. That is our business model, as it were, or that is our product. And our product is now in danger. And so I think that's what's going to drive us all to be open to new methods. What are new ways of assessing? We have to get that assessment validity back. And so teachers are doing that using different assignments. We talked about process versus product. There's a lot more oral assignments, a lot more we're asking students to tell us what they know, because you can't fake that very well. If you've just used ChatGPT to write something, it's really hard to talk about it intelligently. But that is the major challenge. But I also think, to flip this as you suggest, that's also the major opportunity. I don't think we've done assessment well ever at scale. Like, since we've developed multiple choice testing and used that so widely, it is not good. So yes, it's a shame that that's not working anymore. At another level, maybe it's a blessing. Maybe it's going to give us that motivation to say, okay, can we get it right now? And if we get assessment right, does that help us get the rest of it right as well? And I think it will. And that's why I'm so excited about the opportunity of, AI-based oral assessments at scale. We call it Viva Voce. That product is Viva Voce, learning and through the voice, assessing learning through the voice. I think that's the real exciting opportunity for educators, both in the public education, but also in corporate education worlds. I think we will get to a point where we're doing it better.
Fantastic. So you said 2026, you want to make the tombstone for the multiple choice
That
method.
might be a little too optimistic, maybe 2030.
So by the end of this decade, 2030, how do you see this initiative parallel and or other initiatives to shape up
Yeah, I mean,
by the
if we focus on the assessment thing, which I do think of as the gem of all of this, the ability to orally assess at scale, there's three things that we need to get right. It has to be valid. It has to be providing accurate assessments of what the student actually knows. We want it to be as holistic as possible. We want it to be able to be sensitive to all the things we think are good in the education. And then thirdly, we want it to be as fair, as equitable as possible. We want every student who uses this, who goes through this, to leave the experience thinking, that's the best I had. I showed myself as well as I could. However I'm doing, that's how well I'm doing. So those three things, if we get those three things, that's what we need to defeat multiple choice testing. I think, to show the world, oh, this is valid, this is more holistic, it's a better test, and it's more equitable. We need to do a lot of research to get there, right? Right now, we've already got the AIs. I've already done it in my class where they can interrogate my students. 1,800 of them went through an AI interrogation of what they learned. But now we have a transcript, and now we have TAs marking that transcript. But eventually we want to make sure that we can have the AIs do the grading and that those three criteria are met. And if so, then I think we've got a real powerful, way to make change. But that's what we're in the business of doing now, sort of building the agents that do it, but then getting to the point where we can show those three things are true. It's valid, it's holistic, and it's fair.
So a lot of your current work is also kind of training the models, so to speak. So have you been able to include a lot of different region people so that there's less bias towards a particular country or region and things like that? Have you been able to do that?
So we haven't really done a whole lot of that yet because it's been so sort of focused on the things we've been doing. But I think that when I said that third one, that it's fair and that we want every student to kind of be able to show themselves at their best, part of that is getting rid of bias. If you're in an assessment context and you feel bias in the assessment context, that's going to bother you and it's going to get in the way of you expressing yourself. So the good thing about bias and AI that I like to say is AI is certainly biased. Any bias that's on the internet is within the AI. But the good thing about the AI bias is you can see it. Sometimes you can see it visually, like you can ask a AI that produces images to say, show me 3 doctors. And it will show you its bias, right? And so the good news is because you can see it, because you can measure it, you can now correct it. And so we do a lot of what we call red teaming. So to get at your question, we haven't done it yet, but I know how we would, which is we would have members of different cultural groups all interact with the system and try to make it do things that show cultural bias. We would say, ask it the kinds of questions that when you ask your professor, you sometimes get answers that make you go, uncomfortable. Ask it those kind of questions and let us know about the biases that you can uncover. So go and try, and then we can audit the system and we can find out why did it say what it did in that situation and what can we do to make sure it doesn't say that going forward. So that's what we're doing for accuracy and to get rid of hallucinations and all that kind of thing. But I think that would be the path to creating an unbiased assessor. And that's not a small thing because human assessors are biased as well. We just don't see that bias. And so I think the fact that we can see it and correct it is actually a good thing, but we have to acknowledge it's there, and it certainly is there.
Okay, so before we conclude, I would like to give you the elevator pitch time for you to speak to the world about your product. You have recently gone through the pitch yourself. So tell us about it in the next few seconds.
Elevator pitch, literally, if we stepped into an elevator and I had the opportunity, I would literally say, how important to you are these critical conversations with clients and with other people? And are you experiencing issues within your corporation where people are having difficulty having those critical conversations? We are using AI to provide a way of training these that just has not been possible before, exposing, giving your employees practice and giving them real-time feedback to help them improve their conversations, which will improve your innovation, your bottom line, and your success as a company. How's that?
Fantastic. It was absolutely an elevator pitch. So, Professor, absolutely enjoyed a conversation. Every time I talk to you, I expand my horizon in terms of what's going on new in your domain. And
It's
so
interesting how our
fantastic.
conversations are evolving, because I think they began as me as the academic and you as the more business-centric man. And more I feel like I'm coming into your world.
Yeah, absolutely. So great to have conversation with you. We will keep a tab on how things are progressing and hope to uh, host you again in future very soon with new updates and something with new which you have worked on your platform. So
Thank you.
thank you for your time today.
Thank you, SP, as always.
Hope you enjoyed this episode. We sincerely wish you could take something from our conversation today and be able to apply it to your life in a positive way. We value your feedback. This can help us improve our future episodes. So share your thoughts to serve you better. If you want us to focus on a topic which you think is of importance, let us know. We will share our expertise in future episodes. So, see you soon with a new topic and help you in your career.